In the brutal desert, an eagle's scream leads Luke to a dying Apache warrior crushed under a boulder. With no time to spare, Luke uses a dry mesquite log as a lever, prying the rock free and pulling the young man to safety. But this stranger isn't just any warrior. He's the son of a powerful chief, and when 750 Apache riders surround Luke's cabin at dawn, he has just 3 days to prove his heart is true or lose everything. Play easy. Luke never imagined that this day would change his life forever. And it all began with an eagle's cry that didn't sound quite right. The bird circled above the rocky canyon, descending again and again toward the same spot. Luke stopped his horse and watched. 30 years living on the border had taught him to read the desert signs. When an eagle acts like this, something is dying down there. He spurred his mount and galloped toward the rock formations. The midday heat was brutal. The air vibrated over the burning sand. His canteen was nearly empty. He had spent 3 days searching for the stream that used to run through this area. But the drought had dried it up completely. Then he saw it among the rocks. Half buried under a massive stone lay a young Apache warrior. His bronze skin showed alarming signs of dehydration, cracked lips. His face twisted in a grimace of pain even in unconsciousness. The rock had fallen on his right leg, pinning it to the ground. Luke dismounted in a leap, calculating quickly. The young man had been there since at least the previous night, possibly longer. The desert sun shows no mercy. 1 more hour and he would be dead. There was no time for doubt or questions. Luke examined the situation with expert eyes. The rock was too heavy to lift directly, but he saw a solution. A few meters away lay a dry mesquite log, thick and sturdy, strong enough to serve as a lever. He ran, wrenched it from the sandy ground, and returned. He inserted the end of the log under the rock, searching for the perfect fulcrum. A smaller stone served as the pivot. He took a deep breath and pushed down with all his weight. His muscles tensed, the veins in his arms bulged, sweat poured from every pore. The rock resisted as if the desert itself refused to release its victim. "Come on, come on." Luke grunted between clenched teeth. The rock moved. Barely a few inches, but it was enough. Maintaining pressure on the lever, Luke reached out and pulled the young Apache, freeing him from the deadly trap. The warrior's leg was severely bruised, swollen, and likely fractured. The bone hadn't pierced the skin, which was a blessing. Luke had seen enough fractures in his life to know this was serious, but manageable. Without wasting a second, he tore long strips from his own cotton shirt. The fabric tore easily under his calloused hands. He searched among the nearby bushes until he found 2 straight ocotillo branches, perfect for splinting. With precise, careful movements, Luke aligned the leg as best he could. The young man groaned, but did not wake. He placed the branches on either side of the injured limb and secured them firmly with the cloth strips. It wasn't a doctor's work, but it would suffice until they reached a safe place. Then he lifted the warrior. He was lighter than expected, all muscle and tendon without an ounce of fat. Life in the desert forges hard bodies. With effort, Luke mounted him on his horse, placing him in front of the saddle. He held him with one arm while taking the reins with the other. That was when he noticed the necklace, turquoises of the purest blue interwoven with golden eagle feathers, and on his wrist a leather band with symbols Luke recognized. His heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary warrior. This young man was of high birth, possibly the son of a chief. "What a mess I've gotten into," Luke muttered, but his hands were already moving, directing the horse west. His cabin was 2 hours away. 2 hours under the desert's merciless sun with an unconscious, dehydrated man. Luke took out his canteen and moistened the young man's lips with the last drops of water. The precious liquid vanished into that parched mouth. The journey was exhausting. Luke talked constantly, though he knew the Apache couldn't hear him. "You're going to survive, boy. I didn't pull you out from under that rock for you to die on my horse. Hang on. My cabin has fresh well water. I have medicinal herbs. You're going to be okay." The words were as much for the young man as for himself. Luke wasn't used to company. 5 years living alone in the desert make you forget how to talk to other human beings. The landscape stretched endlessly. Saguaro cacti stood like silent giants, their arms reaching toward the relentless sky. Lizards darted among the hot rocks. A roadrunner crossed the path ahead of them and vanished in an instant. Luke knew every stone, every curve, every rock formation in this territory. It had been his home since he decided to walk away from civilization. Here there were no questions, no distrustful looks, No painful memories, only the silence of the desert and the peace that solitude brings. But now, holding this dying warrior against his chest, Luke felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. The sun began its slow descent when finally the cabin appeared in the distance. It was small but sturdy. Thick wooden walls, a Texas-style roof, one narrow window. Beside it, the well he had dug with his own hands, his most valuable possession in this thirsty desert. Luke dismounted and carried the young man inside. He laid him on his cot, the only comfortable piece of furniture in the entire cabin. He lit the fire pit quickly and put water on to heat. He needed to prepare a medicinal poultice. From the shelves he took dried herbs he had collected for months: desert sage to reduce inflammation, willow bark for pain, aloe leaves for sunburned skin, mixing them with expert hands creating a dark green paste with a pungent smell. He applied the poultice to the warrior's swollen leg, then he prepared cold compresses for his burning forehead. The fever was high, too high. Luke worked methodically. Fresh water on the young man's lips every few minutes. Compresses changed constantly. Bandages adjusted, but not too tight. The hours passed. Night fell over the desert with its characteristic cold. Luke lit the oil lamps and continued his vigil. He couldn't sleep. He must not sleep. The young Apache needed constant care. He observed the warrior's face in the flickering light. He was young, perhaps 20 years old. He had noble, strong features. The scars on his arms spoke of battles, of rigorous training, of a life dedicated to war and the hunt. Who was he? What was he doing alone in that canyon? They would be looking for him. Luke stood up and looked out the window into the darkness of the desert. The stars shone brightly in the clear sky. Everything seemed calm, peaceful. He did not know that at that very moment, under those same stars, 750 Apache warriors were riding furiously across the desert. The chief's son had been missing for 2 days, and they would not rest until they found him, dead or alive. When Luke opened his eyes at dawn, the first thing he saw was the dust. A massive cloud rose on the eastern horizon, staining the pink dawn sky with an unnatural reddish hue. It wasn't a sandstorm. Luke knew the difference. This was something far more dangerous. Horses, many horses. He jolted up from his chair, where he had dozed for barely an hour. The young Apache was still unconscious on the cot, his breathing more stable than the night before, but still weak. The fever had dropped slightly thanks to the medicinal herbs. Luke ran to the window and squinted. The dust cloud was approaching rapidly. He could now make out the dark silhouettes of riders, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. His heart began to beat hard. They're looking for him. He muttered to himself, looking at the sleeping warrior. The cabin was completely surrounded in less than 30 minutes. Luke watched from the narrow window as the Apache warriors formed a perfect circle around his home. They didn't shout, they didn't make noise. That silent discipline was more terrifying than any war cry. He counted quickly, 50, 100, 200. He stopped counting. There were too many. Each warrior carried a lance, a bow, and a quiver full of arrows. Some carried rifles. Their horses, magnificent specimens painted with war symbols, pawed the ground impatiently. In the center of the circle, mounted on a stallion black as night, stood the leader. Even from a distance, Luke could see the authority emanating from that man. His eagle feather headdress extended majestically. His face was a stone mask, but his eyes burned with a mixture of fury and desperation. Luke swallowed. He knew exactly who that man was. He had heard the stories at trading posts. The great Chief Storm Sky, leader of one of the most respected and feared Apache bands in the territory. A man who never negotiated, never forgave, who protected his people with legendary fierceness. And Luke had his son. For several endless minutes, no one moved. The silence was absolute except for the occasional neighing of a horse. It was as if the desert itself held its breath waiting to see what would happen. Luke made a decision. There was no way to fight his way out. Even if he had enough bullets, which he didn't, it would be a massacre. And besides, he had done nothing wrong. He had saved the boy, not harmed him. With hands he struggled to keep steady, Luke slowly opened the door of his cabin. The wood creaked in the morning silence like a gunshot. All the warriors instantly tensed their bows. Luke raised both hands, showing they were empty. His rifle was inside, deliberately left behind. He took a step outside, then another. The sunlight hit him full in the face. "No, shoot," he said loudly, using the few Apache words he knew. His pronunciation was terrible, but the message was clear. The great Chief Storm Sky raised a hand. The bows remained taut, but no one fired. The chief dismounted from his horse with a fluid motion and walked toward Luke. Each step was measured, controlled. He was an imposing man, almost as tall as Luke with broad shoulders and muscles that spoke of decades of warrior training. He stopped 3 men away. His black eyes studied Luke with penetrating intensity, as if he could read his soul. "My son," the chief said in surprisingly clear English, though with a marked accent. "Where is my son?" It was not a question, it was a demand. Luke pointed toward the open door of the cabin. "Inside, he's injured but alive. I found him yesterday under a rock in the East Canyon. I saved his life." The chief's eyes narrowed. "White man's lies. I'm not lying," Luke replied firmly. "You can go in and see for yourself. He's in my bed. I splinted his broken leg. I gave him water and medicine. I worked all night to bring his fever down." The chief made a sign. 4 warriors dismounted and quickly entered the cabin, their weapons ready. Luke waited, sweat running down his back not only from the rising heat but from the tension. Seconds passed that felt like hours. Finally, one of the warriors came out and spoke rapidly in Apache. Luke didn't understand the words, but he saw the change in the chief's face. The hardness softened slightly, replaced by something that might have been relief. The great chief Storm Sky entered the cabin. Luke followed cautiously. Inside, the chief knelt beside the cot where his son lay. For the first time, the stone mask cracked. The chief gently touched the young man's forehead, examined the bandages on his leg, smelled the herb poultice. "Swift Sky," the chief murmured, his voice now full of contained emotion. "My son, Swift Sky," that was the young warrior's name. Luke etched the name into his memory. The chief turned to Luke. In his eyes was now a complex mix of emotions: gratitude, distrust, confusion. A white man had saved his son. That went against everything experience had taught him about white men. "You saved his life," he said slowly. "Why white men kill Apache, not save them?" Luke held his gaze. "I'm not like other white men. I live here in the desert far from them. I saw a dying man and I helped him. That's what any decent person would do." The chief studied him for a long time. Finally, he nodded, though distrust had not completely disappeared from his eyes. "My son will live because of you. That creates a debt." "I don't want anything," Luke replied honestly. "I just wanted to help." "Debts must be paid," the chief insisted. "It is our way, but my people do not trust white men. With good reason. They have lied to us, stolen from us, killed us." Luke understood. He had seen enough of the cruelty of settlers and the army to know the chief was absolutely right. "I understand," he said simply. The great chief Storm Sky stood up. "You must prove that your heart is true, that you did not save my son to use him as a hostage or for gain." "How can I prove that?" The chief walked to the door and looked toward the horizon. "You have 3 days. In 3 days you must bring me something that shows your worth and your honor. Something that shows you are different from other white men." Luke felt the weight of that demand. "And if I can't?" The chief stared at him. "Then saving my son will not be enough to erase centuries of betrayal." 3 days. Luke had only 3 days to prove he was different, that his gesture had been genuine. As the Apache warriors stood guard around his cabin, he sat on the dusty ground and thought. The great chief Storm Sky had left 20 warriors watching. They weren't exactly jailers, but they didn't let him go far either. Swift Sky was still recovering on the cot, drifting in and out of consciousness. Whenever he woke, he drank water eagerly and fell back asleep. Luke left the cabin and walked to his well. The warriors watched him in silence, their faces impassive. He drew fresh water with the wooden bucket and drank deeply. The cold liquid went down his throat, giving him clarity. What could he give an Apache chief that would demonstrate honor and worth? He had no gold, no jewels. His cabin contained barely the basics for survival. Tools, some blankets, sparse provisions. Then he remembered something. 2 years ago, while exploring the rock formations to the south, he had discovered something extraordinary. Something he had kept secret because he knew that if anyone else discovered it, hordes of settlers would come destroying the peace of the desert. An underground spring. More than that, an entire cavern full of crystal clear water fed by an underground river flowing from the distant mountains. He had found the entrance by accident when his horse stumbled near a crack in the rocks. It was the most valuable secret of the desert water. Abundant, fresh, permanent water. During months of drought, that water had been his alone. He visited it discreetly, filled his canteens, returned to his cabin. He had never told anyone. In the desert, revealing a water source was like handing over your own life. But now, looking at the Apache warriors, whose lands were suffering the worst drought in decades, Luke knew what he had to do. He approached the warrior who seemed to be in charge of the watch group. He was a middle-aged man with a scar across his left cheek. "I need to speak with the great Chief Storm Sky," Luke said. The warrior looked at him expressionlessly. "The chief returns tomorrow at dawn. It's important. I have something to show him, but I must take him there personally." The warrior considered this. "You will wait until tomorrow." Luke felt frustrated. He had no choice. He returned to his cabin and spent the rest of the day caring for Swift Sky. The young warrior finally opened his eyes fully that afternoon. His gaze met Luke's, and there was a moment of confusion, then recognition. "You saved me," Swift Sky said in Apache. Luke didn't understand the exact words, but grasped the meaning from his tone. Luke nodded and offered more water. Swift Sky drank. Then he tried to sit up. He grimaced in pain when he moved his splinted leg. Slowly, Luke said, helping him lie back down, "Your leg needs time to heal." Though they didn't share a language, they communicated through gestures. Luke showed him how he had splinted the leg, how he had applied the medicinal herbs. Swift Sky watched attentively, nodding occasionally. That night Luke barely slept. His mind spun around the decision he had made. Revealing the spring would mean losing his most precious resource, but it would also mean giving the Apache tribe something invaluable: hope and survival. Dawn arrived with an unusual fresh breeze. The great Chief Storm Sky appeared on the horizon mounted on his black stallion, followed by more warriors. This time he brought an old woman with him, a woman whose wrinkled face showed wisdom accumulated over decades. The chief entered the cabin and saw his son sitting up, weak but conscious. Father and son looked at each other. There were no dramatic embraces or effusive words, just a deep understanding. Swift Sky bowed his head respectfully. The chief placed a hand on his son's shoulder briefly. Then he turned to Luke. "You have cared well for my son. The healer says he will live and walk again." "I'm glad," Luke replied sincerely. "Now you must fulfill your test." "What do you bring me?" Luke took a deep breath. "I can't bring it here. I have to show you. It's half a day's ride to the south." The chief's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "A trap? I give you my word. You can bring as many warriors as you want. I have nothing to hide except what I want to share with you." The chief studied Luke's face for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "We will leave now. 30 warriors will come with us." Luke was saddling his horse when Swift Sky called him from the cabin door, leaning on an improvised cane. He spoke in Apache. The chief translated, "My son says he trusts you. He says your hands were gentle when you healed his wounds. He says your eyes do not lie." Luke felt a lump in his throat. He nodded toward Swift Sky, who returned the gesture. The party set off south, Luke leading, followed by the great Chief Storm Sky, and the 30 warriors rode in silence through the desert. The sun slowly rose in the sky, warming the air. After 3 hours, Luke began looking for the marks he had secretly made on the rocks. An eagle-shaped stone, 3 cacti in a straight line, a rock formation that looked like a closed fist. He found them all. "Here," he said finally, dismounting near what appeared to be just another unremarkable rocky outcrop. The warriors looked around in confusion. There was nothing special visible, only rocks and sand. Luke walked toward a narrow crack between 2 enormous rock formations. The crack was so narrow it looked like just a shadow. He crouched and disappeared inside. "Follow me." His voice echoed from within. One by one, "It's narrow, but safe." The great Chief Storm Sky hesitated only a moment before following. The warriors came behind. The passage was claustrophobic, the rock walls brushing shoulders, but after 30 steps, the space opened dramatically. Luke lit a torch he had left hidden in a crevice in the rock. The light revealed a massive cavern, and in the center, shining under the torchlight like 1,000 diamonds, was the water. An underground lake at least 100 m in diameter. The water was so clear they could see the rocky bottom. A small stream entered through a tunnel on the north side, constantly feeding the lake. The sound of running water was like music in the cavern's silence. The Apache warriors stood completely motionless, their eyes wide with awe. The great Chief Storm Sky walked slowly to the lake's edge, knelt, touched the water with his hand, and brought it to his lips. "Fresh water," he whispered her. Luke spoke softly. "This spring never runs dry. I have watched it for 2 years. Even in the worst drought, the water keeps flowing. It is enough for your whole tribe and more." The chief turned to him. In his eyes was something Luke never expected to see. Tears. "Our people are dying of thirst. Our livestock is dying. The streams have dried up, and you give us this? It is my gift," Luke said. "To prove that my heart is true." The great chief Storm Sky remained silent for several minutes, looking at the underground lake as if he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. The warriors were also in shock. Some knelt by the water, touching it reverently, drinking from it. The cavern resonated with the soft drip of water falling from stalactites on the ceiling. The temperature here was cool, a blessed relief from the brutal heat of the outside desert. The torchlight created dancing shadows on the rocky walls. One of the oldest warriors spoke in Apache, his voice full of emotion. The chief listened, and then translated for Luke. "Greyhawk says this water is a gift from the spirits. He says for 50 years his people have searched for something like this. Many have died of thirst, children, elders, all suffering while the sun burned the earth." Luke felt the weight of those words. He had seen the effects of drought. He knew the price the desert exacted. The chief approached Luke. His face had changed completely. The hardness and distrust had been replaced by something deeper. Genuine respect. "You have given away your most valuable treasure," the chief said. "In the desert, whoever controls water controls life. You could have kept this secret. You could have made yourself powerful with it. You could have sold the water to settlers for gold. Water shouldn't be sold," Luke replied. "It is a gift from the earth. It should be shared." The chief placed both hands on Luke's shoulders. It was a gesture of deep meaning in Apache culture. A recognition of brotherhood. "Today you have shown more honor than many men in their entire lives. You not only saved my son, you have also saved my people." The 30 warriors present struck the ground with their lances in unison, creating a rumbling sound that echoed throughout the cavern. It was a sign of respect, of acceptance. "We must bring the tribe here," the chief said, making quick decisions. "We will set up our camp near this cavern. We will build homes, raise our children here. This will be our new home." Luke had anticipated this. "The entrance is narrow. You will need to widen it so families can pass easily. You should also build a system to bring the water outside for the horses and livestock." The chief nodded, impressed by Luke's practical thinking. "You are right. We will start the work immediately." They returned to camp before nightfall. The news spread like fire through the entire Apache tribe. Luke watched as hundreds of people gathered around the great chief Storm Sky, listening to the story of the underground spring. There was celebration that night. The women prepared food, the drums sounded, and for the first time in a long time, there was hope on everyone's faces. Children ran and laughed. The elders smiled. Luke sat apart watching. It wasn't his celebration. He didn't want to intrude, but Swift Sky limped toward him, helped by 2 young warriors. "Sit with us," he said in halting English, which Luke didn't know he spoke. "You are part of this. You are part of us now." Luke was led to the main circle. He was given food, dried venison, cornbread, wild berries. He ate while listening to the stories the elders told. Though he didn't understand all the Apache words, he grasped the meaning through gestures and expressions. The great chief Storm Sky stood, and silence fell over the crowd. He spoke for several minutes in Apache, his voice strong and clear. Then he turned to Luke and switched to English. "I have told my people of your bravery and generosity. I have explained that you saved my son expecting no reward. I have described how you gave us the spring knowing it was your most valuable possession." He paused, looking around the circle of faces lit by the fire. "My people have decided. You are no longer a stranger. You are no longer just a white man. From today you are Water Heart. This is your new name among us. It means one whose heart is as generous as the flowing water." The warriors struck their lances against the ground again. The women ululated in approval. The children repeated the name, Water Heart. Water Heart. Luke felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Belonging, acceptance, family. Swift Sky stood up with difficulty. "I also have something to say," he announced. His English was better than Luke had initially thought. "This man found me when I was dying. He could have left me there. He could have stolen my belongings and gone on his way. Instead, he risked his own water, his own comfort to save me." The young warrior looked directly at Luke. "I owe you my life. According to our traditions, that makes us blood brothers. If you ever need help, you only have to call me. I will fight for you. I will die for you if necessary." Luke stood and walked toward Swift Sky. They looked into each other's eyes for a long moment. Then Luke extended his hand in the white man's style. Swift Sky took it firmly and shook it. Then, following his own custom, he placed his other hand over Luke's heart. "Brother," said Swift Sky. "Brother," repeated Luke. The following days were intense with work. Luke helped the Apache widen the cavern entrance. They used stone tools and wooden levers to remove the smaller rocks and smooth the passage. It was hard work under the relentless sun, but everyone participated with enthusiasm. Luke also showed them how to build a channel system using hollowed logs and flat stones to bring water from the cavern to an outside area where they could set up watering troughs for the animals. The women began building wickiups, the traditional dwellings made of branches and hides in semicircles around the cavern entrance. The children played near the water for the first time in months, their laughter filling the air. One afternoon, while Luke rested in the shade, the great Chief Storm Sky sat down beside him. "You have changed everything for us," the chief said. "Before, we were desperate. We thought about attacking settler settlements just to steal water. There would have been war, death." Luke felt the weight of that. The desert is hard on everyone. It doesn't distinguish between Apache and white man. "But you did distinguish," the chief replied. "You saw an injured man, not an enemy. That is rare in these times." Luke looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to descend. Maybe if more people thought that way, there wouldn't be so much war. The chief smiled, a rare expression on his usually serious face. "You are wise, Waterheart. My people chose well when they gave you that name." That night, Luke returned to his cabin for the first time in days. It felt strange to be alone again after so much constant company. But now his solitude didn't feel like isolation. He knew that just half a day's ride away was an entire community that considered him one of their own. He lay down on his cot and closed his eyes. A week ago his life was simple. Just him, his horse, and the endless desert. Now everything had changed. He had found something he didn't know he was looking for. He had found a home. 6 months had passed since that day Luke found Swift Sky under the rock. The desert had changed, or perhaps it was Luke who had changed the way he saw it. The Apache camp thrived near the underground spring. The wickiups had multiplied, forming a small organized village. Children ran among the dwellings healthy and happy. Livestock grazed on nearby lands where the constant presence of water had allowed fresh vegetation to grow. Luke divided his time between his cabin and the camp. He had learned basic Apache words, and the tribe members had improved their English. Communication was no longer a barrier. Swift Sky had recovered completely. His leg had healed well thanks to Luke's constant care and the tribe's healer. Now he walked without a limp and had resumed his warrior training. Every morning he practiced with bow and lance alongside the other young men. One hot afternoon, Luke was repairing the roof of his cabin when he saw dust on the horizon. This time it wasn't the Apache tribe. They were different riders in uniforms, soldiers. His heart quickened. He counted quickly. 15 men. Maybe 20 wearing the uniform of the United States Army. This was not a casual patrol. They came with a purpose. Luke climbed down from his roof and waited. The soldiers approached slowly, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. The leader was a young captain with a blonde mustache and cold blue eyes. "Are you Luke?" the captain asked without dismounting. "I'm Luke, Captain Morrison. We have received reports that there is a large concentration of Apaches in this area, approximately 700 people. Do you know anything about this?" Luke kept his expression neutral. "There's an Apache camp to the south. They are peaceful. They haven't caused any problems." The captain laughed humorlessly. "Apaches are never peaceful. They are savages. Our orders are to relocate them to a reservation by force if necessary." "They don't need to be relocated," Luke replied firmly. "They have water, land. They are living in peace." "I don't care what you think, mister. We have government orders. All Apaches must be on designated reservations. It's for their own safety and that of the settlers." Luke felt anger growing in his chest. "The only threat here is you. These people just want to live in peace." The captain finally dismounted. He approached Luke until they were face to face. "Listen carefully, friend. You can either cooperate and tell us exactly where that camp is, or you can be arrested for aiding and abetting hostiles. What's it going to be?" Before Luke could answer, he heard the sound of hooves. From the south, a group of Apache riders appeared. Swift Sky. He led a group of 20 warriors. They had seen the soldiers and came to investigate. The tension exploded instantly. The soldiers drew their weapons. The Apache warriors drew their bows. Luke found himself exactly in the middle between two worlds about to collide. "Stop!" Luke shouted, raising both hands. "No one shoot." He turned to the captain. "Lower your weapons. I can resolve this peacefully." "There's nothing to resolve," the captain replied harshly. "Those savages are coming with us now." Luke looked at Swift Sky, who had dismounted and was walking toward them. The young warrior no longer limped. His bearing was proud and strong. He reached where Luke stood and spoke in clear English. "These soldiers want to take